Greetings from Warsaw. This is Jed Distler, the official Chopin Competition blogger for Gramophone magazine, and welcome once again to our daily Chopin report here at the 19th International Chopin Competition. It's been a week since we've started these reports, and I have just been so touched by your feedback, all of the kind notes of encouragement that you've been sending to me. And I've also gotten some very interesting comments about performances, sometimes not totally sharing my opinion, but you express your point of view with such astuteness and clarity and perception, and it just opens up everything to a really civil and stimulating debate, which I think is so important in the music world, because I think this just keeps the music fresh and alive in the community. And I really appreciate all of your comments, and it would be really great to keep this Chopin report going past the competition. Let's see what we can do. But in fact, I got a message yesterday saying that the Kate Liu disc that I mentioned when I was recommending recordings, the excerpts from her 2015 Chopin competition, I had mentioned that it included her performance of the first concerto. And what was I thinking? Because I did not actually have the physical CDs in hand, so I think I was hallucinating. But one of you kindly corrected me, so here it is. This is Kate Liu live at the 2015 Chopin competition. And it does have all the solo compositions that I mentioned, but it does not have the concerto, so that's my bad. So last night we had the first of 3 evenings of final rounds, and the 11 finalists who were selected, each of them has to play their choice of one out of the 2 Chopin piano concertos, and they have to preface the concerto with Chopin's Polonaise-fantasy. Now, this is a new rule. This is something brand new, and it went into effect this year for the 19th competition, because it was decided that because the concertos represent early Chopin, that it might be instructive to hear the finalists all play one of the principal works from Chopin's late period. Actually, it's hard to fathom the idea of a Chopin late period because he died at the age of 39. But also, the Polonaise-fantasy is a tough nut to crack, and it's a challenging piece to hold together. So it's really a test of a pianist's organizational skills, not to mention technique and projection and the ability to create character and to hold attention over 13 minutes. So as such, hearing 4 concerto performances in one concert plus 4 Polonaise fantasies adds up to a rather long evening, arguably too long to some people. I mean, I like the idea of coupling a concerto with the Polonaise fantasy in theory, but 4 times in a row? I don't know. Actually, for me, being the unrepentant piano maven that I am, I found it fascinating to listen and to compare all the performances last night. So first, I'm going to run down all 4 Polonaise fantasy performances. Tianyu Li played it first, and I found his performance to be very nice on the surface, although careful in many ways, and sometimes losing shape and momentum, and he was relying quite a lot on the sustain pedal. Eric Liu played it next, and to my ears, he was maybe less impressive in the parts where you need a strong underlying rhythm, that kind of stuff. But in the more fantasy-like episodes and in moments of introspection, he played with a lot of beauty and care and real specificity of accent and where he was placing dynamics. And it was really quite wonderful in that way. That remarkable young 16-year-old pianist who is going to be 17 very soon, Tian Yao Liu, had stronger rhythm altogether and much more of a sense of direction in terms of how her climaxes were launched and how they landed. Now, I could have imagined her giving a greater dynamic range, but her sound really, really opened up in the final pages. You really felt like you were going on a journey with this performance. It was quite gratifying. Now, Vincent Ong got more dynamic contrast in the Polonaise-fantasy than anyone else I had heard this evening. And I think this partly is due to the unusual resonating power of the Kawai grand piano that he's been using since day one. I did not find his interpretation so naturally ebbing and flowing as Tian Yao Liu's interpretation, but he does have clear ideas about how he wants this piece to go. And his contrapuntal layering in the last section, and indeed actually throughout the piece, I thought was quite interesting, and he always held my attention. If I can be simplistic, maybe I'd say that Vincent Ong is an intellectual in the Polonaise-fantasy, whereas Tian Yao Liu is more instinctive, but that's just simplifying. So on to the concertos. Eric Liu was the only one of the four pianists to take on the Concerto No. 2 in F minor. And by the way, the concertos, both the first and second, were performed using newly restored orchestrations, and these have real revelations of balance and in how the woodwinds are much more to the foreground, and the performances were really exemplary. I'll talk about them in a little bit. But with Eric Liu in the F minor concerto, I found his outer movements very well played from a technical standpoint, with a lot of elegance and finesse, but they didn't quite scintillate to my taste. The passage work didn't quite have the lilt and the sense of dance that I really want from this music, but I did enjoy the restraint and introspection and concentration on color that he brought to the slow movement. It really was quite beautiful in its way. Now, let's talk about the first concerto in E minor. Tian Yu Li kind of went in and out of focus with passage work that, to my ears, lacked contrast and character, although I do have to say that he got better in the rondo finale when the main theme returned and continued toward the end. Maybe it was too little too late. I also sensed some nervousness on his part, and maybe he had not fully acclimatized to playing with the orchestra. And by the way, kudos to the Warsaw Philharmonic and to the conductor Andrzej Borejko, who provided strong and committed support the entire evening. And what beautifully synchronized string work, and the woodwinds, like I said, to the fore, and all of the first desk soloists were really, really excellent. Now, Vincent Ong's performance of the first concerto, I think, fared best in the first movement. And the first movement could easily absorb his interesting ideas about phrasing and tempo and how he would stretch out certain lyrical passages. But the central romance kind of fell flat because this pianist did not always follow through his long lyrical lines to their final destination. Like, he'll start a phrase very strongly, but he doesn't always keep the energy up. I don't mean like energy being loud. I'm talking about how the notes connect, the note-to-note connection and the inner rhythm. And his solo work in the rondo finale seemed to transpire all on the same level, with not much variety of sound and character. Also, it felt that the basic tempo, which was slower than what we heard in the other two Chopin E minor performances, this tempo seemed to bog down a bit as the performance unfolded. Although maybe it didn't bog down. I would have to check how it sounded on the live stream, but this was my impression in the hall. On the other hand, I could have been getting fatigued at the end of a very long evening, and I was bogging down, so it could have been my ears. But the third of 3 Chopin E minor concertos in one night. However, and this is my big however, there's no question that Tianyao Liu brought the E minor concerto to such vibrant life, and her playing had constant sparkle and rhythmic point in every phrase, and she got out of the slow movement's way and just kind of let the music seemingly play itself, with the cantabiles just floating on their own volition. And you could tell, both watching her and from hearing her, that she was having so much fun in the finale. And I think the musicians in the orchestra were having fun because they were smiling. And I also think that she was really listening to and responding to her fellow musicians, rather than being all wrapped up in her own sound world and treating the orchestra like a doormat. For instance, when the bassoon had important solos, she would pull back and engage in musical conversation, chamber music style, and then she would kind of finish the phrase when she had to repeat the phrase. So there was a lot of give and take between the piano soloist and the conductor and the orchestra. And because she did not put a wrong accent or a vague rhythm anywhere, I would wager that she probably was the easiest of the 4 pianists for the conductor to follow. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but I will just say that that's true. But you could really hear how solo and tutti passages dovetailed, as if they probably had had more rehearsal time than they actually did. But there were no dead spots whatsoever in this performance. Now, of course, we have 7 more concerto performances over the next 2 days. So I'm not going to predict anything yet, but I will come back to this performance of the E minor concerto with Tianyao Liu. I am sure that will happen. So from Warsaw, this is Jed Distler. You've been watching the Chopin Report, direct from the 19th International Chopin Competition. We're going to be back tomorrow, so until then, take good care, stay safe, stay well, and be kind to one another.